Why the church was terrified of this lost gospel found in Egypt cold open. For 1400 years, the church told you Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. She wasn't. They knew she wasn't. In 591 CE, a pope named Gregory stood before his congregation and merged her story with an unnamed sinful woman from the book of Luke. No evidence, no justification. One sermon. And just like that, the most important woman in the New Testament became a sinner. That lie stood for nearly 1400 years. The church quietly corrected it in 1969. No announcement, no apology, no explanation for why it happened in the first place. Most people still don't know. But here is what they really don't know. 2,000 miles away, buried in the Egyptian desert, there was a document, nearly 2,000 years old, found wrapped in feathers in a Cairo market in 1896. A gospel, her gospel, and in it, she is not a sinner, not a prostitute, not a repentant outcast standing at the edges of the story. She is the most spiritually advanced disciple of Jesus Christ, the one he trusted above all others, the one who understood what the male apostles couldn't, the one Peter was afraid of. The Vatican has known about this document for over a century. They have never said a single word about it. Not once. Why not? To understand why, you need to know what they found and where. The Find Cairo. 1896. A German scholar named Karl Reinhardt is browsing an antiquities market, not a museum, a market, when a dealer hands him a papyrus manuscript wrapped in feathers. Reinhardt buys it. He doesn't fully understand what he has. Nobody does. Not yet. The manuscript is written in Coptic. It dates to approximately the 5th century CE, but the text it contains is far older. Scholars would later determine it was copied from a Greek original, written sometime around 120 to 180 CE. It has no complete title. But near the end, a name appears. Mary. Reinhardt brings it to Berlin. It sits in a museum for 8 years before anyone publishes a translation. Then World War I delays further study. Then World War II. It takes until 1955, nearly 60 years after its discovery, for a full scholarly edition to appear. 60 years. For context, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947. They were translated, debated, and globally published within decades. The Gospel of Mary sat in a Berlin museum for 60 years. That is not bureaucratic delay. That is a pattern. What IT actually says here is what the Gospel of Mary claims. Not vaguely, specifically.
First, after the resurrection, Jesus appeared privately to Mary Magdalene and gave her teachings he did not give the other disciples. Not parables, not blessings. A structured theology of the soul, how it ascends through layers of spiritual reality, how it defeats the powers that try to hold it back. Technical, advanced, given to her alone. Second, spiritual knowledge according to this gospel comes from within. Not through a priest, not through a sacrament, not through an institution. The kingdom, as Mary describes it, is not a place you are granted access to. It is something you already carry. Read that again slowly. If that theology is true, if direct inner experience is the path, then you do not need the church. You do not need the Pope. You do not need confession or ordination or the entire vertical power structure that has governed Western civilization for 2,000 years. The church is not just unnecessary, it is in the way. Third, when Mary shares these teachings with the other disciples, Peter doesn't accept them. He challenges her directly. He says, "Did Jesus really teach a woman what he didn't teach us?" Andrew backs him up. Mary weeps, not from weakness, from the recognition of something she already knew. Then Levi steps in. He defends her. He tells Peter he is arguing against her the way their enemies argue against them. Peter loses that argument. The man the entire Catholic Church traces its authority back to, the first pope, the rock on which the church was built, loses an argument about spiritual authority to a woman. In a gospel the church has never officially acknowledged. The paper trail. This is where it stops being theology and starts feeling like a crime scene. 180 CE, Irenaeus of Lyon writes against heresies. He catalogues dozens of texts circulating among early Christian communities, texts like the Gospel of Mary, and systematically labels them dangerous, false, to be rejected. He doesn't just disagree with them, he names them as threats. 325 CE, the Council of Nicaea. The Roman Emperor Constantine convenes the first major council of Christian bishops. Doctrinal unity becomes official policy. What counts as scripture is increasingly controlled. 367 CE, Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria sends a letter to every church under his authority listing exactly which texts are canonical. Everything else is to be destroyed. Destroyed. Somewhere in Upper Egypt, a group of monks reads that letter, and instead of burning their library, they bury it. They seal dozens of texts in a large ceramic jar and hide it in the cliffs near a town called Nag Hammadi. They are protecting something they believe is worth protecting. In 1945, an Egyptian farmer digging in those same cliffs accidentally breaks open that jar. Inside, 52 texts, hidden for 1600 years, buried not by enemies of Christianity, but by Christians themselves, trying to save what they loved from other Christians who wanted it gone. The pattern does not need to be said out loud. It is already obvious. The missing pages, the Gospel of Mary, is not complete. The manuscript Reinhardt found in Cairo is missing 4 pages from the beginning, 6 pages torn from the middle. Gone. We do not know when they disappeared. We do not know who removed them. We do not know if they were lost to time or taken deliberately. What we know is this: the pages that survived were threatening enough to be ignored for a century. The missing pages came from the sections describing Mary's private teachings in the most detail. The teachings we do have are fragmentary, incomplete. They describe a soul ascending through powers that try to stop it: anger, desire, ignorance, before reaching silence. The pages that describe what comes us after the silence are the ones that are missing. We have the door. We do not have what is behind it. And that absence, that specific surgical absence, is its own kind of evidence. The real terror, forget theology for a moment. Think about org charts. The Catholic Church's entire claim to authority rests on a single chain. Jesus appointed Peter. Peter became the first bishop of Rome. Every pope since has been the successor to Peter. Every cardinal answers to the pope. Every bishop answers to the cardinals. Every priest answers to the bishops. 2,000 years. One unbroken line. All of it running back to Peter. Now read the Gospel of Mary again. Peter is wrong. Peter is challenged. Peter is corrected, not by Jesus, but by a woman Jesus trusted more. If Mary outranked Peter in spiritual authority, if the man at the top of that 2,000-year chain was not actually at the top, then what exactly is the church standing on? Not a rock, sand. Every pope, every council, every inquisition, every war fought under that banner, every woman told she could not lead, could not speak, could not hold authority in the house of God. All of it justified by a hierarchy that may have been constructed specifically to replace the one that actually existed. That is not a theological dispute. That is the flaw dropping out. And that is why you do not respond to it. You do not dignify it. You do not acknowledge it exists. Because the moment you do, the moment you sit across from a 2,000-year-old gospel written on Egyptian papyrus, you have already admitted it frightens you. Silence is not indifference. Silence is the strategy. It always has been. What was lost, pull back further. The Gospel of Mary was not alone in that Cairo market. It was not alone in that jar in the Egyptian desert. It was one document among dozens, the surviving fragments of an entire alternative Christianity, a version of the faith where authority came from direct spiritual knowledge, not institutional appointment, where the inner life of the individual mattered more than their submission to a hierarchy, where women led, taught, and held the highest positions of spiritual trust. That version of Christianity existed. It had communities, it had texts, it had followers who believed deeply enough to bury their library in the desert rather than burn it. It lost, not in a debate, not in a theological dispute where the best argument won. It lost because the other version had the backing of the Roman Empire, the organizational infrastructure of bishops and councils, and the willingness to use the word heresy as a weapon. We are living in the world of the version that won. We are reading the Bible, the version that one assembled. We are following the leadership structures, the version that one designed. And in 1896, in a market in Cairo, wrapped in feathers, the version that lost tried to speak again. 3 theories here is where you decide what you believe. Theory A. The suppression was legitimate. Early Christianity was a fragile, persecuted movement trying to survive in a hostile empire. Doctrinal unity was not a power grab. It was a survival strategy. Hard decisions were made. Some texts were excluded. That is not a conspiracy. That is how institutions survive. The Gospel of Mary was excluded because it contradicted the emerging consensus, not because it was dangerous, but because it was incompatible. Theory B. The theology was the cover. What the early church fathers actually feared was not bad doctrine. It was the organizational implication of good doctrine. A faith centered on internal spiritual authority has no need for priests, bishops, or popes. The Gospel of Mary didn't just challenge the theology. It made the entire institution structurally unnecessary. And institutions, above everything else, protect their own existence. Note that Theory B does not require anyone to be consciously evil. It only requires powerful men to recognize, perhaps not even consciously, which ideas were dangerous to their power, and act accordingly. Theory C. The Gospel of Mary was never meant for a general audience. Early Gnostic texts were deliberately esoteric, written for advanced practitioners, not congregations. Calling them suppressed may misunderstand what they were. They were not rejected scripture. They were private teachings that were never meant to be scripture in the first place. 3 theories, 1 gospel, 4 pages missing from the front, 6 from the middle. A pope who called her a prostitute in 591 CE. A quiet correction in 1969 that almost nobody noticed. And a major institution that has had over 100 years to respond to her gospel and has chosen every single time not to. You tell me which theory that sounds like. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one.